so that we don't have to go to somebody and say, well, you might be infected, but it might be a false positive. We do a second test. That's a test usually called the Western blot.
In 1992, when I was told by my doctor that I was HIV positive, that was only a verbal admission to me. She didn't give me the written paper that came from the lab that tested my blood. I found out that it says this indicates possible infection by virus.
There can be mistakes from the antibody test, and there are conditions that can cause the test to be inaccurate.
Now that I've got the package insert for that test kit, it says positive results using any specimen type should be followed with additional testing. But this is the test that they use to confirm with.
This has a margin of error done properly that's extremely low. In other words, it's one of medicine's better tests.
I don't think the Western blot is a useful diagnostic test. I don't think it's worth doing.
Did he give a reason? You know, anybody can say anything. I think it's stupid to drive a car. But come on, you got to give a reason.
It's a useful prognostic test. Once you know that someone is infected, then you can follow their antibody response as well with Western blots.
I'd say he's absolutely wrong. It has a complete usefulness.
You don't need a Western blot. And it's become a dogma in HIV research that you need one ELISA followed by a Western. You don't. You need two different kinds of ELISAs made in two different formats.
Would you ever want to confirm somebody is positive using just ELISAs?
No, never. It's against the rules. It's against the recommendations.
It's a turbulent sea of argument about how can we use this test? When can we use this test? Why does this test have no standard? We have a group now of about 40 patients that have no detectable virus in their body, but they're not being treated. So the first question is, are they really infected?
So the Western blots can have false positives?
No, the Western blot was negative too. But they were told they were positive by a lab, yes, that misread the Western blot.
Heavyweight champion Tommy Morrison tested positive in 1996. 11 years later, in 2007, he tested negative multiple times, allowing him to return to the ring.
There's constant discussion in the community of people who do diagnostic testing and the blood bankers about how to read these tests.
When you're looking at this Western blot, how do you determine what is a positive?
You need a certain number of bands being present. It depends a little bit on the producer of the test.
It depends on the manufacturer. Is there different criteria for what might be a positive?
Yeah, there are different criteria from the manufacturer. Thank you for the word. And also there are guidelines from the WHO and UNAIDS.
Well, HIV infection is diagnosed with rather now routine laboratory tests, which for which there are criteria for diagnosis established by the manufacturer, FDA.
Claudia showed me the package insert that comes with the Western blot. It contains 8 different sets of criteria for diagnosing HIV infection.
Because of the different criteria that apply in different countries, you can test HIV positive in one country and be given an AIDS diagnosis as a result of that, whereas in another country you won't test HIV positive and you won't be given an AIDS diagnosis.
It's ludicrous that you can be positive in one country and not positive in another.
Theoretically, I could be diagnosed with AIDS in the United States, but if I take 3 steps to my right, I wouldn't be diagnosed with AIDS, or I would lose my AIDS diagnosis when I crossed the border.
In 1992, I was encouraged by a doctor to take what's called an HIV test as a matter of social responsibility. And I was shocked and devastated and horrified when the results came back positive. It was one of those moments that everyone fears their whole life. A week later, I take the same test to an AIDS specialist. He looks and says, "This isn't a positive test. I don't know what this test means."
Since a false positive looks like a true positive, how can you ever distinguish whether it's truly a positive or a negative?
Well, that's a great question. it's going to be very hard to determine a false positive.
So I take the test again, and this time my results come back marked from the lab indeterminate. I'm faced with the decision, do I want to wait 6 weeks to test again or do it right away? I opted for right away. My results that time come back positive. Took it again, came back negative. I took it again, positive.
What happens if you're positive on one criteria but negative on another manufacturer's criteria? How do you decide who's infected and who's not?
You will use the most sensitive criterion.
In late December of 2007, I read about new legislation passed in New Jersey calling for the mandatory testing of pregnant women or newborn infants should the mother's status be unknown.
HIV mandatory testing, to me, is a no-brainer.
I'm very much opposed to the concept of mandatory testing of any population because the tests are scientifically shown to be unreliable and inaccurate.
You have no reason to fear this bill. And my hope is that eventually this will become a federal law so that every woman in this country would be tested.
But HIV testing isn't an absolutely precise science.
When I confronted my doctor about that, she said, we're way past Western blot now. We have the viral load test. But when you get the package insert for the viral load test, it says,
if you test positive, you are considered confirmed infected with HIV. But at the bottom of the page, in fine print, it states a person should have additional testing.
It does not allow you to tell a single person on this planet that they are HIV positive. And it's a scandal that this test continues to be used.
So again, I'm asking, where's the test? Where's the test that can confirm a diagnosis of HIV infection? And I can't find one.
I have the package insert from the manufacturer which they supplied me with. And under limitations of the test, it states that risk factors should be used in conjunction with the test. Has a person had sex? Have they used drugs? Have they had a blood transfusion? And then in conjunction with the test, not the test alone, but with the test, then you decide whether the person is positive or negative. Do the answers to these questions help aid in the diagnosis?
Of course they did.
Really?
They do.
Now, if I tell you that the test you took was lousy and didn't mean a thing, does that make any difference for everybody to hear?
It'd make a difference for me.
Yeah, I know.
How can we say that HIV is the cause of AIDS when we don't know, based on current tests, whether or not anybody diagnosed positive actually has HIV?